Welcome in to season 18. My name is Neil Matthews. In just a moment, you're going to hear a little commercial on a little venture that I am being a part of, and that is Podcast Insight Solutions. It's a new service that I'm offering here at the show for podcasters or future podcasters, anyone that may fit in that category. So if you know someone that has a show, let them know about Podcast Insight Solutions. There will be a link in our show notes where you can book a consultation. Now, on to season 18. I got to give a little listener discretion advisory. Today's episode is going to involve murder and rape. I've never been in the true crime fandom. I have watched Criminal Minds a time or two, NCIS, things of that nature. But I have to give this disclaimer. If this is any way triggering, I would advise maybe not listening to this episode. If you want to hear a story and you want to hear an account of a man who lost a lot, please continue to listen. Welcome into season 18. We call it Homecoming. That was such a great episode. Why didn't more people listen? Sometimes I feel like, is this thing even on? Hi, my name is Neil Matthews. I too have been exactly what I just described. Wondering and wanting a second set of ears to hear my show. Well, that's when I came up with Podcast Insight Solutions, providing you insight and solutions into your show. Whether that be improving your interview style, improving your questions, getting the guests to really come alive, or maybe it's the audio. That's always a little shaky, or maybe it's the editing. I could get better at that. Well, that's where Podcast Insight Solutions comes in. I'd like to listen to your show, provide a second set of ears, and help you come up with solutions to those problem areas in your show. Right now, we're offering a free 30-minute consultation to take your show from meh to shining like a diamond. At Podcast Insight Solutions, we're transforming podcasts with expert insight. Book your consultation today.
Welcome home to Other People's Shoes, where every step tells a story. Get ready for an emotional journey like no other with Homecoming. Our homes are more than just a place. It's where we find safety, comfort, and connection through intimate conversations, heartfelt anecdotes, and inspiring stories. We believe that everyone deserves to feel welcomed and secure in their own home. Let us remind you of the beauty and warmth that home should bring. Other People's Shoes, where every step leads you to Homecoming.
That is right. Welcome home. Welcome home today. It feels good to say that. I don't know about anybody else. When I envisioned as a child coming home, I did sort of envision the slippers, the newspaper. I envisioned those things, maybe the North Carolina robe waiting for me that's soft and squishy and cushy, and my daughter in tow with, "Daddy, my homework is done. I can't wait to play outside," and maybe she has pigtails. Okay, I took that way too far. Holy Smokey the Bear. Actually, it's not even Smokey the Bear anymore. It's just Smokey Bear, by the way. We've been saying it wrong for a lot of years now. But you know, one thing about bears and things of that nature that have scared me is really those darn Yankees out in New York. I never was really a fan of them for a hot second. Okay, admittedly, I was. They had a guy named David Justice. They were pretty fun to watch then. In those days, they also had a guy named Deion Sanders, or AKA Coach Prime. Now, that's right. He did also play for the Yankees. This guy didn't play for the Yankees, but he is here to tell us about his homecoming story. So let me welcome home Jeff. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm great, Neil. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. It's my pleasure. Help me with this. When we reached out to you, before we get to you and your story and what I love to lead off with, I want to know this maybe out of the gate, out of the jump, as I call it. When you heard us say, "Welcome home," that did something for you. First person that has experienced this. So tell us about that. When we said, "Jeff, welcome home," what did that do to you?
That had a special meaning to me. That had a special meaning and made me feel really warm. It kind of was a literal thing, and I dare say much more dramatic than what many other people in other walks of life. It might be a welcome home, as in you went off to college and you came back, or maybe you moved back to the same city or same town you grew up in, or it might even be that things didn't work out quite so well for you. And so you unfortunately had to move back home with your parents to rebuild, restart with the idea of, again, venturing out and starting out again as an adult. Could even be people in a romantic relationship and they separated or maybe even got divorced, and then they decided to get back together and moving back into the house that they once occupied with that person. So it could be a welcome home there. It could be a welcome home that was articulated by kids that stayed with the mother, as typically happens. This is much more dramatic. I won't bury the lead. I'll wait until you unfold things, but it did have a rather literal and much more dramatic meaning for me.
Well, yeah, I do love that. Jeff, again, welcome in, welcome home, as I already said. We love to lead off every show with this question, and that's this. Jeff, what size shoes do you wear?
I wear a size 9.
Okay. And is there a certain brand or style that we might find in front of our front door inside? My wife and I, have recently finished building our house. We're still excited about that, and we're trying our very best to not wear outside shoes in on the hardwood floor. What pair of shoes might we find by the front door?
I don't really have a favorite brand. I'm actually not a brand person. Look, I think that a lot of times products are overpriced, that the difference in quality between a name brand or a minor brand versus a name brand, I think that often, though not always, it's not really worth it. So you're likely to find a non-brand pair of shoes. You will find Double E. I do have a wide foot, but that's as far as it'll go. But that's not a brand, though. It's a size.
So that is a size, Double E. That's awesome.
Size 9, and it needs to be Double E. I have a wide foot.
Do you struggle with finding footwear?
I do struggle with finding footwear, yes. And unfortunately, I must go to the shoe store in order to get a pair of shoes or a sneakers. It doesn't work if someone tries to buy for a gift or do me a favor and go out and buy it for me, because I have to be there to try it on. The only exception would be if I had decided to literally order the same exact thing, take an old pair with you to get the same exact everything. Then I don't need to be present.
All right, so cross you off our Christmas list for shoes to get you, because you would, again, have to be present. You have to be present to win, present to be there. So that's fun stuff. When you think of coming home, what did that mean to you? Because again, like we kind of already teased a little bit, it did mean something to you. What was that?
Yeah, it was a welcome home, as in welcome back to your home, welcome back to society. Unfortunately, spent 16 years in prison wrongfully prior to being proven innocent through DNA testing.
So the question has to be asked then. What led you to be incarcerated for 16 years?
The year is 1990. We're in Westchester County, specifically Peekskill, which is a suburb in New York. A classmate was found murdered and raped. That was November 17th, 1989. She was at 2 of my classes, a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name. She knew mine. That was really the extent of it. I got on the police radar. The police interviewed many students from the high school. Some of them told the police that they might want to speak with me because I didn't quite fit in. I lived a double life as a kid. I obviously didn't think of it that way. Looking back, it's clear that that's what there was my life after school and there was my life in school. After school, I was popular. I was one of the main kids that lived in the apartment complexes and surrounding areas. And in general, whatever I would suggest would usually be what we would do. If we're going to play kickball, if we're going swimming, we're going to the arcade, we're doing Monopoly, we're riding bikes, we're shooting hoops, whatever the case is. But that's my life after school. My life in school, the kids were a little bit older than me. I had skipped first grade. That kind of caught up to me in high school. And then I wasn't really familiar with the kids in the schools. I was kind of on the fringes of the high school society. So as a result of that, I was kind of quiet, withdrawn to myself.
Were you a loner, would you say, nowadays?
I would say.
Would that be a good description?
Well, in school.
Yeah. In school, to be
yes,
clear. Yeah,
yes,
in school,
correct.
to be clear.
In school, yes.
Okay.
Yes, 100% correct.
Just so we can kind of paint a good picture.
I guess the thought in this high school kid's mind when suggesting the police they might want to look at me, I guess their thought was, well, loners commit heinous crimes. I think that's what their thought process was. That got me on the police radar. An additional factor is that I was a sensitive teenager. This was my first brush with death, and I had an emotional reaction to it. The police thought that being as though I barely knew the victim, my having a emotional reaction was suspicious. Though I do have to say that in a larger context, I really wasn't all that different from everyone else in the city of Peekskill, because this had really shook up the whole community to the point that there was free mental health counseling offered to anybody in the city that wanted it. A reinforcing factor is that the Peekskill police, not being that experienced in homicides, they got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the characteristics of the actual perpetrator. And I had the fortune of matching that. Some of those characteristics were somebody who was a loner, likely somebody in the high school. Gee, that really narrows it down quite a bit. Not. For about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they would talk to me like I was a suspect. And when they would push too hard and I would become frightened and I'd want to get away from them, then they would switch it up. And Jeff as this junior detective helper theme was developed. I think that they learned, probably from conversation with me, what I dreamed about being when I grew up, before I was a teenager, was a cop. That, along with my age, was how they were able to pull the wool over my eyes, that a 16-year-old would be able to help them in an active homicide investigation. They would say things like, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They'd ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinion was important. I came from a single-parent household. My father was never involved in my life in any aspect. And that also intersected with the good cop, bad cop technique, in which one officer was pretending to be my friend. And in time, I began to look at him as a father figure. Eventually, they got me to agree to take a lie detector test. They said, look, we have some new information in the file. We want to share that with you. That'll allow you to be even more helpful to us. Plus, we stop asking you questions like you're a suspect. Next day, rather than report to the high school, I went to the police station for the test. It was a school day. My mother and grandmother thought that I was in school. So therefore, they had no clue what was going on. And therefore, they did not call around looking for me. They drove me from Peekskill, which is in Westchester County. They drove me to the town of Brewster, which was in Putnam County. So across county lines, 40 minutes away by car, which meant that I was not able to leave anymore on my own. I was totally dependent upon the police. They put me in the car, riding by myself with the officer who was pretending to be my friend, with the bad cop and lieutenant in a different vehicle. So the psychological games continued, the ruse continued. The polygraphist was actually a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, Daniel Stevens. He was dressed like a civilian, never identified himself as law enforcement, never read me my rights. So I never had any idea that he was a cop. They gave me a 4-page brochure which explained how the polygraph worked. It had a lot of big words in it that I didn't understand. But I figured, well, I'm there to help the police. What does it matter? Let's just get on with it. Keep in mind also, I don't have an attorney present. They don't give me anything to eat the whole time I was there. So from there, he puts me in a small room. He gives me countless cups of coffee. Seems pretty clear that the purpose of that is to get me nervous. Then he literally wires me up to the polygraph machine. Then he launches into his third-degree tactics. So he raises his voice at me. He invades my personal space. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. Now, as each hour increases, my fear increases in proportion to the time. I want to also add that I'm not used to talking to adult males. I mean, particularly not somebody that's conducting themselves in such an aggressive manner like he is. He keeps that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Towards the end, he says, what do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. I just want you to verbally confirm it. And that really shot my fear through the roof. And at that point, the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers are going to harm you. I've been holding them off. I can't do this anymore. You have to help yourself. Look, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested. Being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, just being concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and no one else did either loomed large in my mind. The push-pull dynamic, on one hand, the possible harm, on the other, this false life preserver that he threw me. I made the decision to make up a story based on the information they gave me that day and the 6 weeks run up to it. By the time it was all said and done, I had collapsed on the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Obviously, I was arrested. that whole process was not videotaped. It was not audio taped. There's no signed confession. It's just the cop's word for it. That allowed the police to leave out the threat and false promise.
I think the crime junkies of the world are now in arms, ready to hear more. I have a good friend of mine. Her daughter loves crime drama, these type of stories. And when I told her that we had secured your interview with us today, she said, you know, Neil, I don't want you to take this the wrong way. I don't normally listen to your show. I was like, listen, Taylor, it's okay. Taylor, I get it. It's fine. She said, I want to know when he comes out. I want to know when you air his show. I want to be first in line. You better not tell anyone before you tell me first. So Taylor, this is for you. I want to dedicate this episode to you. Jeff, there's so many questions that are swirling in my head. First off, let's see if we can walk back through this the best I can.
Right. And remember, that's just the arrest and how I got on their radar.
I want to talk about the crime. So it sounds like this girl kind of, in some respects, got some notoriety because of the crime that happened to her. Is that accurate? Am I hearing that correctly?
That is accurate. Right. And remember, this is a murder and rape. Did get notoriety. I want to just put just a tad of color. There was a lot of public pressure on the police to solve the crime. There was town hall meetings repeatedly held. Safety tips were given by the mayor, updates on investigation. Rumors were abound. The whole city essentially came to a shutdown. Parents were bringing their kids right to school and then picking them up and bringing them straight home. The girl's parents didn't think the Peekskill police knew what they were doing. They went to the state police, asked the state police to take over the investigation, which didn't happen. The state police went to the Peekskill police and told them that. So all that, there was a lot of pressure to solve this thing.
Because again, we're talking about a murderer and a rapist out there. This could happen again.
Correct.
This could happen to Susie. This could happen to Judy. This could happen to all these other girls that are now prey for this sick, deranged individual.
Yes, exactly right.
When they are interrogating you, I think that's accurate description of
It is
what
accurate.
of what's happening. So they're interrogating you. Are they showing you pictures of the crime scene?
Yes, they did.
And again, how old are you? Remind me.
16.
16. And this is what year again?
89, 90. It's at the tail end of 89.
We're not in the 2000s yet. We're not in the technology realm. I think that's a great piece to
Correct.
remember. We are in the early stages of the 90s. And for most of my listeners, you know what that time period was like. You know you had that pager on your hip. You did not have that iPhone in your pocket yet. You did not have the Android next to you. So that's important to remember. Have you had any interaction with the victim's parents?
I ran into the victim's parents, specifically her mother, outside the courtroom. You know, you mentioned that this could happen to someone else. The actual perpetrator wound up killing a second victim 3.5 years later. There was someone else that was killed. When I went to the sentencing of the actual perpetrator, eventually gets identified and gets caught for killing the victim in the case that I did the 16 years for. The victim's mother came to the courtroom for the sentencing. She offered a victim impact statement. Firstly, she said, I thought this was really powerful. She said she invited everybody that had anything to do with what happened to me to bow their heads in shame, which is a shot across the bow at the law enforcement. And then outside the courtroom, she requested to speak to me. So I went and spoke to her. The water was running and we gave an embrace and everything. We exchanged contact info. And about a month later, at her invitation, I spent several weekends with her and her oldest daughter. So they fully embraced the idea of my innocence. And I had a chance to explain to them why did I falsely confess to it. So it was definitely a kind of a powerful thing. Last had anything to do with the family many years ago. The daughter wanted an update from me. She was actually called at a deposition. And when she was finished, we chit-chatted a couple of minutes. She wanted to know how I was doing. We wish you the best. We obviously feel bad for you. We really don't want to have any further contact with you. We don't want to stay in touch because you remind us of a very painful time period that we really would like to forget. Respecting that, I've had zero contact with them since then. It's been a long time, maybe 7 or 8 years, or maybe even more than that since I spoke with them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, again, Jeff, don't take this the wrong way. You had been wrongly accused of hurting my daughter. I don't know if I'd ever want to see you again. Just put that out there. That's the element to me that's so intriguing about this is, again, you're serving this jail time, this 16-year sentence. Was that the max sentence, or at the end of 16 years or somewhere in that junction of 16 years, they found this evidence and then they're like, oops-a-daisy. I don't mean to be so flippant there. We made some mistakes and now we can release him because we found that.
My sentence was 15 to life. I had been charged as an adult, tried as an adult, and sentenced to an adult maximum security prison. 15 to life means you have to do 15 years minimum. Then you see the parole board in contemplation of discretionary release by the parole board. The fact that I did 16 years means that I went to the parole board, where largely because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, they declined to release me. They ordered me to serve 2 more years. And at that point, the additional evidence, further DNA testing, the DNA data bank had been created. It identified the actual perpetrator, and my charges were dismissed on actual innocence grounds. He was confronted with the DNA, he confessed, and he was arrested and pled guilty and was sentenced. So before the trial started, a DNA test came in from the FBI lab, which showed that semen found in and around the victim did not match me. Rather than acknowledge they made a mistake, they continued to prosecute. To explain away the DNA, the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud, to commit perjury. When there's an autopsy done, there's audio and written notes which are taken as findings are made. So it was only 6 months after doing the autopsy, only after DNA didn't match me, that this medical examiner suddenly says, now try to follow this, it's crazy. He remembered that he forgot to document medical evidence which he claimed showed that the victim had been promiscuous, which is what opened the door for the prosecutor to argue, well, that's how the DNA doesn't match Jeff, and yet he's guilty. She was sleeping around. Matter of fact, she slept with somebody. He named somebody by name that he claimed that she had slept with before I murdered and raped her. The problem with all of that is that he never tried to prove it. He never got a DNA sample from this other individual. He never even called him as a witness. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury. He got away with that because the victim's family was not coming to court. They had no idea that her reputation was being trashed. That was all a lie. She was not promiscuous. She actually led a very sheltered life as a 15-year-old Colombian immigrant in the country for 1.5 years, never going anywhere if she wasn't by her older sister or her parents. So no, she was not promiscuous. The main reason I got away with is my public defender essentially didn't defend me. When the cops came to court, they left the threat and false promise out of their testimony. I was the only way that those facts could have been put on the record to be considered. My attorney would not allow me to take the stand. He said it wasn't his job to prove I was innocent. It was up to the prosecution to prove that I was guilty. Yeah, that's a legal principle, but it's a naive way to practice law. If somebody is alleged to have confessed, then you have to answer the confession. You have to explain it. You have to disprove it, bring it all together in your closing argument. He didn't do that. Sometimes he told the jury I never confessed. Other times he told the jury I did confess, but it was coerced. And at still other times he was saying it was a false confession. So he had to have been standing there with no credibility at all. He rarely met with me. When I tried to explain to him I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, he was always shutting me up. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to argue that proved the confession was coerced but false. When it was time to cross-examine the medical examiner, he stood up in open court and said, "You're going to be pleased to know that I don't have a single question for you. My lawyer should have never represented me because of a conflict of interest." So this other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of Westchester County Legal Aid, and specifically by the lawyer who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. And so that conflict prevented the defense from asking him to give a DNA sample. It prevented us from calling him as a witness to explode the whole consensual sex theory. That's how he failed me.
I'm just so sorry for you. Okay, let me paint a picture, at least in my mind, as you're describing and you're talking like I'm a sketch artist, which feels like a negative even connotation there. Low income family, I'd imagine.
Yes, that's true.
Dad not at home.
Right.
Mom probably working her tail off to support you. Maybe grandma likewise working her tail off to help mom support you. Probably no real male figures, no coaches, no mentors, no youth pastors, no bishops, no priests, nobody there to take care of, again, not be disrespectful, little Jeff.
Right.
Nobody there to kind of put their arm around you and say, Jeff, I got you, bro. Nobody doing that. And then all of a sudden, this horrific crime happens. Let's call it what it is. Very horrific crime. A lot of notoriety, a lot of press, a lot of eyes on this case, as I've heard on dramatic television and these type of cop shows. A lot of eyes on this case. We got to close this thing quick. All these things play into a factor. And they're like, okay, well, let's find somebody that we can kind of hang this on and pin our hat to. It sounds comical in most cop shows that I've seen or jail movies, dramatic things that I've heard. Oh, my lawyer screwed me. Well, in this case, it kind of maybe makes sense. Your lawyer probably did screw you because he's like, I don't want to be your public defender. Like, I don't want to represent this quote unquote monster that they're now pinning this to. I don't want any of that. And to me, there's so many people along the way that failed you, that failed this young Jeff, that failed this young man. And to me, my question really, and it's simple, have you forgiven any of these people involved?
I don't think about them, to be honest to you. I'm not angry. I want to enjoy my life as much as I can. I can't do that if I'm angry or bitter. I feel like I lost so much as it is. Why would I want to, in effect, lose the rest of my life? It's not like I'd be impacting them if I was angry or bitter. The vehicle that I use to actualize that is I take that energy and channel that into the advocacy work that I do. You mentioned all the people that failed along the way. I want to add another person who failed along the way, the judge. Victim's clothes, including her bra, had been entered into evidence by the prosecutor. The jury asked to see the bra, which was important because one of the statements that they coerced out of me was I said that I ripped her bra off. Well, the way that bras are made, a lot of them, you can't physically rip it off. So when the jury asked to see the bra, that's when the judge told the court that the clothes, including the bra, had been left in the courtroom over the weekend and that the janitors apparently thought that it was garbage. And so it's been thrown out. And so it no longer was available. And in addition to that, in general, polygraph test results are not admissible because it's not scientific. Intelligence officers and military are even taught how to beat the polygraph. Innocent people often fail the polygraph. I mean, the whole premise of the polygraph is that if you lie, you'll become nervous. That nervousness will result in an increased pulse rate. It's the pulse rate that's measured. But anything that gets your pulse rate going, including fear, you become fearful, your pulse rate will increase and the machine would pick that up as a lie. Certainly that's prejudicial. I mean, imagining lay people, a jury, hearing that somebody failed a polygraph. Could you imagine how prejudicial that is? So despite that general rule being the case, the judge said, well, because this alleged confession happened in the course of the polygraph, I'm going to allow the polygraph to testify. The polygraphist was allowed to repeatedly tell the jury that I failed the polygraph, that I lied when I denied committing the crime, and at the same time banning my lawyer from asking him any questions about the methods he used to arrive at his opinion. The jury sent out a note on the third day of deliberation, and they asked the judge, well, are we going to be kept sequestered over the Christmas holiday? Because this was happening in December, if we can't come up with a verdict. And the judge said yes. And I learned many years later that at that point it was 11-1 for a conviction, but there was a holdout juror who thought I was innocent. They were all pressuring him. And when the judge sent that answer in, that ratcheted the pressure up and nobody wanted to be there over the Christmas holiday. He switched his vote to guilty. Based on that, I was wrongfully convicted. And at the sentencing, the judge said to me, in response to my begging him to overturn the verdict, referencing the DNA, he said, maybe you are innocent. Instead of him doing the right thing and overturning the conviction, which he could have done by reversing any of the rulings he made against me in the course of the trial, including this evidence issue we went over, he instead took the easy way out. So he gave me a 15 to life sentence. That was the minimum he could have given. He could have given me 20 or 25, but the point is he sentenced me. He sentenced me to prison, even though he said to me, maybe you are innocent.
I don't even know what to respond with. I would be absolutely livid. But like you said, anger is wasted energy. Unforgiveness, wasted energy. There's so many things along the journey and the trajectory of this mess that you were in. Now that you sit here before me If we could somehow time travel back to you at 15, maybe he's out riding his bike still.
Right.
Maybe he's dreaming of being a cop one day. That is a prestigious honor to be associated with the NYPD. If we could go back to 15-year-old Jeff, what do you say to that guy?
I would say do not speak to the police without a lawyer being present. When the police read you your rights, there's a reason why they read them to you. Ask for a lawyer, insist on that. Don't come down off of that. Don't think to yourself, well, because you're innocent, because you don't know anything. Of course, it's safe to talk to the cops without a lawyer. What could possibly happen? Well, actually, Jeff, quite a bit could actually happen. Look, don't go down a line of reasoning either. Oh, if I ask for a lawyer, then I'm really going to look guilty. The innocence of suspects often works against them. Ask for a lawyer, insist on that. And the lawyer will even out the playing field. They'll prevent you from being coerced. There won't be any threats. And whatever discussion has to happen then can happen with the lawyer present, if you decide to speak to them with the lawyer present.
See, I just wonder, though, in my imagination of this imaginary scenario taking place, because as far as I know, there's no time travel that exists, even in our time
Not yet,
period.
right? Not yet.
Not yet. But I just wonder, would 15-year-old Jeff know and understand what you're talking about?
If it's explained a lot more simple than what that was, and that was a pretty good stab by me just now at trying to explain it simple. It probably would need to be broken down a little bit more than that. Still, honestly, even then, it would be very, very hard to grasp the idea that it's not always that the cops are your friend, that it's not always that they're there to serve and protect, even that they might make a mistake, which could have cataclysmic implications on your life. It's hard for us as a society to grasp that. That's even more so as somebody at 15.
I feel bad, man. I feel bad. So many people that should be serving us, that should be protecting us, failed you in so many ways. And to me, that's the hard part. Well, I was just going to ask, so how has your family responded since your release? They missed you and you lost 16 years of your life. So that's no Christmases, that's no birthdays, that's no graduation, that's no Thanksgivings, that's none of the cool events that we as a society get excited about and gather family around for.
It took a long time for me to repair relations with my extended family. The overwhelming majority of them never came to see me. The few that did would visit and then often disappear for 3 years at a time, and then visit and disappear, visit and disappear. My brother, who is 3.5 years younger than I am, he came 3 times in 16 years, not at all in the last decade. My mother was my only consistent visitor. In the last 5 or 6 years, I was lucky if I saw her once every 6 months. My grandmother used to frequently come with my mother, but then she passed away 5 or 6 years into my wrongful imprisonment. My point is that for most intents and purposes, though not literally, I essentially did the time by myself. It was awkward when I'd meet up with them because I knew who they were intellectually from memories when I was younger. I was a different person now, and so are they. Many of them there was like a type of collective guilt that was there because they had not supported me on the morale level. And there were a few times where my mother made rounds and asked them, could everybody contribute a manageable amount of money so that we could hire a lawyer so Jeff could try to regain his freedom that way. And everybody declined to participate in that. We had to work through that. I mean, now at this point, I've been home for 18 years, so I feel like we've worked things into a good place. Now, I don't feel any particular closeness. I'm not holding anything against people because I want to enjoy my life, kind of like what I talked about earlier. At the same time, I don't feel any particular closeness. And sometimes I just make rounds, holidays or other occasions, just to do it because I guess that's what people do with relatives. There's no special closeness there. And I know that if something happens, I really can't rely on them.
So you're again alone.
Yeah, in some way, sure, I am. We were talking about people that failed. The court process actually got worse during the appeals. So I went to the appellate division, first court you have to go to. I finally had a great lawyer. She was a public defender, not with the same office, a different type of public defender. She argued that I was innocent based on the DNA not matching me. She argued that they hadn't proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. verdict was against the weight of the evidence, that there was legally insufficient evidence. She argued that my Fifth Amendment rights had been violated by the way I'd been questioned. She argued that my right to confrontation had been violated because by the judge preventing my lawyer from asking questions of the polygraph, its procedures. She argued the evidence issue. She argued the judge was biased. She argued a total of 10 issues of law. And the appellate division wrote that there was, and by the way, on the district attorney's end, one thing that they counter-argued that still sticks out, they wrote that a negative DNA test result is no insulation to a guilty verdict. Stop and process that for a half second. When I got the decision from the court, they claimed in their decision that I was free to come and go as I wanted on the day of the interrogation, so that the statements were not coerced. Then they ruled that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt. And then they ruled that they looked at all the rest of my issues and found them either to be without merit or not preserved for review. They ruled against me 5-0. If you think that was bad, it was all downhill from there. The re-argument motion in front of them was denied, in one word, denied. I went to the Court of Appeals, New York State's highest court. The procedures, you have to get permission to appeal to them before they will agree to let you appeal to them. Wrote that there was no merit in law to justify reviewing my case, so they were declining to give me permission to appeal to them. I lost in federal court because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information pertaining to the filing procedures, so my petition arrived 4 days too late. The then Westchester District Attorney, Janine Pirro, was not the DA when I was convicted, but took office before the first appeal was decided. She kept the ball rolling against me in all these appeals. Her office argued that those 4 days were prejudicial to the government, and therefore the court should simply rule that I was late without looking at my issues, which is what the court did, by the way. Now I'm time barred, so I appealed that to the Federal Court of Appeals. I got permission to appeal to them on the procedural issue. My lawyer argued that the delay was not caused either by me or my attorney, but by the court clerk's misinformation. It was argued that upholding that ruling would cause a miscarriage of justice to continue. And it was argued that reversing the procedural matter would open the door for more sophisticated DNA testing, which Pirro declined to give me when I wrote a letter to her office asking for further testing when the data bank was created. Those are all reasonable arguments. I think no one needs to be a lawyer to know that. Again, the DA opposed. Again, the court ruled with the district attorney. Those two judges were Judge Rosemary Pooler and future U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. They signed off on that lower federal court decision. Then my lawyer moved to re-argue the case in front of them, requesting that all the judges on the circuit hear the case, make a ruling. That was denied. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to give me permission to appeal to them. That was the end of my appeals. The only way back into court to find some new evidence. So I wrote letters for 4 years because I had no money to hire anybody and rarely got any responses. Then I went to the parole board. I got denied there also because I maintained my innocence.
The moment you found out you were going to be able to walk free, take me to that day.
I ultimately wound up with the Innocence Project representing me. One of my letters, which I wrote to a book author and care of the publishing company, was instead sent by the publishing company to an investigator. And when I sent her the paperwork, she was convinced of my innocence because she had never saw a case where the DNA didn't match somebody, and yet there was a conviction. So she suggested I write the Innocence Project. She lobbied them from outside the organization. She got other respected legal entities to lobby them. Then I got lucky that one of the intake workers, who was not a lawyer, represented the case to them several times. So she presented a total of 3 times, getting them to accept it. That was the first key. Second key was that Pirro left office and her successor was willing to let me have further testing. Now, in terms of how I got the news, my lawyer came to see me unexpectedly. I had just been transferred to Sing Sing, and she said to me, the items have been tested. Now, keep in mind, my antennas were up. I was on the lookout for anything unusual. Anything unusual normally spelled disaster for me. Federal court stuff like we just talked about. And I said, well, what are you talking about? The items aren't supposed to be tested for another month. And she said, the DA had the lab move up to testing, the results match the actual perpetrator. You're going home tomorrow. And I said, no, I'm not. She said I was, and I said I wasn't. And she said I was, and I said I wasn't. And I had like a 3.5 hour type of mental paralysis. My head was spinning. One thought after another was going through my mind. One thought had nothing to do with the other. None of it had anything to do with my going home. Sat there, held my hand, and every now and then she would break in and say, ready to talk about tomorrow. I'm like, no, listen, we're not talking about tomorrow, not going home. Don't play with me like that, okay? No, I can't hope. I can't hope anymore because it hurts too much when I lose. Every time I get denied, that's like I've been wrongfully convicted all over again. What made it real was she looked up at the clock and said, look, the visiting hours are almost over. There's a ton of work to do between now and tomorrow. I also need to have the staff go out and get you a suit so you have something to appear in court. I need to get your clothing sizes and your shoe size. I believe I felt better for 5 minutes. And of course, then a different fear came in my head. Something was going to happen between that day and the next day. And they were going to change their mind and then do what they always do, which was to fight and win. You know, the third key, I mentioned the 2 keys earlier. The third key was that the actual perpetrator's DNA was in the data bank. It matched him. It was there because he killed a second victim just 3.5 years later as a result of being left on the loose, free in Peekskill while I was doing time for his crime. So he confessed, like I said, he confessed to the crime when he was confronted by the DNA. He ultimately pled guilty and was sentenced for that.
Have you ever had any interaction with the gentleman that actually did the first crime?
I guess the short answer is no. If I was to put a little bit of color to it, the closest I came to that happening was I was in the federal court. We were there for a deposition in connection with the lawsuit that I filed. And my lawyer's idea was we can prove that the cops coerced you by proving that they told you what to say, they gave you the details, and you spit it out. We know that your false confession matched the police theory. So let's call the actual perpetrator to establish how the crime actually happens, and that's going to obviously differ from that scenario. I was in the courtroom a few feet away on a witness stand, and he's being deposed. So that was the closest I came.
You don't have any ill feelings towards him?
I don't. What he did with it, he did. It was horrible. It was terrible. And he was sentenced for that. He's paying for that. And I can't hold up. I can't ruin my own life by being angry. I want to mention to you my proudest moment as a human being. And ironically, it actually ties into him. We're in the courtroom. My lawyer, he elbows me. We're about to break for lunch, and he elbows me, and he says, they're going to burn him. And he's like, huge grin on his face, like a conspiratorial type of grin by someone that just said something evil that's about to happen and expecting the person they say it to similarly relish in that same moment. I said to him, well, what do you mean they're going to burn him? And he said, they're not going to feed him. And I said, what do you mean they're not going to feed him? And he said, well, what do you care? He killed 2 people. One of them he raped. And then he was content to let you do time for his crime to the point that you did 16 years. Why do you care? And I said, that's why he's in prison. That's why he's been given an additional 20 years. He had 7 years left to do out of the 20-year sentence for the second victim he killed. And he's just gotten 20 years added to his sentence. That's why he's been sentenced. Punishment is the loss of his freedom, not to be mistreated. He's going to eat. He's eating. As a matter of fact, you're going to ask him. You're going to make sure he eats. And if you don't, I will. So when we came back from having lunch, he was asked, that was the first couple of questions that he was asked. Did you eat? You're given something to drink. No, he didn't have anything special. He just had the regular sandwiches that anybody would get. Dehumanization is not an option.
When you think about the time that you spent and the things that you went through and the appeal process, if you don't become your own advocate, and you don't become the person that maybe pushes for your freedom, is there anyone else doing that?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not.
If you don't, again, become your own advocate, if you don't become pushing yourself and pushing and pushing and pushing, which, by the way, at 16, that seems a tall order for someone with maybe not a great educational Truly, like you're not a lawyer. You don't have this lawyer experience. You didn't go to
No
NYU
lawyer.
law school. You didn't go to Columbia. You didn't go to Harvard. Maybe barely graduated high school. And really, it sounds like you didn't even finish high school.
I didn't. Look, you're completely correct. Okay. I did not finish high school. I was a sophomore at the time I was arrested, in prison from 17 to 32. I can honestly say that while I got the GED while I was in prison, I basically passed. I didn't learn anything in the classroom there. I mean, I barely passed just based on what I knew already. I mean, I did get an associate's degree in prison and a year towards the bachelor's before funding was cut. But none of that is legal education, as you might imagine. So yeah, it was a tall order for someone between 17 and 32 to be pushing. I did have a good public defender that they assigned, but when my appeals were over, which was 11 years in, now at this point, I'm 28. I'm on my own then. I used to go to the law library all the time. I really didn't trust attorneys to defend me anymore, considering how that turned out for me at the trial. I used to read articles about people who were exonerated, and I would study like who helped them, what route did they take, in addition to using those materials as motivation. One of the common elements of people that were exonerated is that they engaged in letter writing. They engaged in trying to recruit people to help build the bridge between them and the ultimate legal help that they needed. Another element is while I was wrongfully imprisoned, I had to continue to fight off feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, thoughts of giving up, suicidal ideation. I knew that no one was coming to my rescue. I had no choice but to hold it together in order to maximize my chance of trying to find somebody. I mean, look, I wrote lawyers, nonprofit organizations. I wrote faith-based organizations. Maybe somebody in their congregation was a lawyer that could be persuaded to take my case, or maybe they would be willing to raise money for me so I could hire. If I could come up with a line of reasoning that somebody that was not in the legal field, there was something that they could do, which could potentially set in motion a chain of events that culminated into my getting legal help. I wrote the letter and I explained to them what it was that they could do, and never took for granted they would understand. And I just didn't stop. But no matter what, I just didn't stop. I didn't take no for an answer, because I knew that I was going to stay in prison. I was going to die in prison if I didn't keep pushing. I didn't keep fighting. And despite all this resolve, man, I don't want to give the wrong idea. This was very, very hard psychologically, emotionally, physically. Some of the guards disliked me. There's a vigilante mentality was people convicted of sex offenses. So I always had to worry about the prisoners. They didn't like that. Some of the guards adopted that mindset. There were times I was beat up. One time I nearly lost my life. Half the time I couldn't even believe that I actually was in prison, despite what my senses were telling me, because only guilty people are convicted. So there was that aspect of it. And my 16th year was the most difficult. Think about what I'd been through to that point. I lost a trial, lost 7 appeals, wrote 4 years worth of letters looking for help, never a response other than the occasional no, an unsuccessful trip to the parole board. At that point, my last year, I really struggled with giving up. The thought of suicide really intensified because I felt like I was never going to get out. Some help arrived in the nick of time. I had placed the ad in a newspaper far out in California. It was in the Sacramento Bee. And I placed the ad in the Sacramento Bee because another prisoner suggested it. Another reason beyond that is because I had placed a few ads in New York publications. So my theory was, let me try to get a pen pal. So first of all, I could have some contact with the outside, which I desperately need just to keep going. And secondly, my ulterior motive, which was I was hoping that at some point in the conversation, the topic would come up, what are you actually doing in prison? And that would give me my chance to explain that I was innocent, what happened. Maybe they could help connect me to some kind of legal services. I had gotten in trouble a couple of times from the prison authorities. One prison authority or another saw ads I placed in a couple of papers, and they claimed that that was soliciting, which was a rule violation. So I figured, well, look, I'm not going to stop, because if I stop, I'm just going to die in prison. You people don't give a damn. So I'm going to do what I got to do to fight for my freedom. Hopefully I don't get caught. But if I do and I got to pay a price inside here, it'll be what it is, because I'm not going to stop. I figured if I placed the ad in a California paper, the odds of them seeing that seemed to be greatly reduced. And so somebody saw the ad and wrote me. I mentioned I was innocent in the DNA, all in in the ad. Ironically, of all people, it was a crime victim who had his own brush with the law where he felt that the authorities let him down, and the aspect of they never arrested the person who assaulted him. That was his story. Point being, it was an unusual person to respond. And I was asking this stranger who I didn't know from a can of paint, do you think I should quit? You think I should give up? Maybe I should just go ahead and commit suicide. I'm never going to get out of here. It was to that point. And he encouraged me to keep going. He corresponded with me. He gave ideas. I mean, he was really in over his head on that. He had no idea of what he was talking about as far as the ideas to get help. I ignored that part of it. And I just focused on the morale stuff he was talking and distracting ourselves. I talked some sports as well. But the point is, all those things had to come together for me to somehow make it through that whole journey.
Well, again, Jeff, I want to say thanks so much for all that you shared today. I want to give you an opportunity right now. Now, I know you've taken on the crusade truly of really trying to help folks that have been in your situation. I would even say been in your shoes. Maybe not quite literally, because it's tough to get in a 9 double E shoe. But I want to say thank you. Thank you for not quitting on yourself. Thank you for seeing the value in your life, and that it has value and that you have value. And I think that's important for me to share to you in this moment. Tell me about your cause and your crusade, and how can folks get more information about you and maybe how you're helping others?
Sure. So I was exonerated. I was an individual advocate for 5 years. I was speaking. I was writing independent newspaper week. I was a weekly columnist. I was doing trading privacy for awareness, new media interviews. I was meeting with elected officials. Got a scholarship from Mercer University to finish the bachelor's. I got a master's degree because I felt the extra credential would make me a better advocate. My thesis is written on wrongful conviction cause and reform. I eventually got compensated after 5 years, used some of the money to start the nonprofit, the Jeff Deskovic Foundation for Justice. To date, we've been able to free 14 people wrongfully imprisoned, so people in my shoes. Also, we've been able to help pass 3 laws and another 6 as key members of the coalition. It could happen to you. The idea being, let's prevent what happened to me from happening to others through policy changes. At some point, I became not satisfied with sitting in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to sit at the defense table. I wanted to represent some of the clients. I wanted to make some of the arguments. Hence, going to law school, becoming a lawyer, helped to overturn my first wrongful conviction as co-counsel a year ago, helped overturn Andre Brown's wrongful conviction. He'd been in for 23 years. My life is dedicated to this cause. Imagine for a moment, what if there was 25,000 people that were willing to donate $3 to $5 a month on a recurring monthly basis? That would give us close to $1 million. We would be able to have additional lawyers, paralegals, investigators, other essential personnel. Right now, we're working at 13 cases, but we're at our capacity. We really need more funds. We do have a Patreon page, so if people can share word of mouth, if they can share on social media, certainly donate themselves. If you work at a corporation and they engage in corporate philanthropy, just giving us suggestion, putting us on their radar. I just want to get into a short conversation. Here's who I am. Here's my credentials. Here's what the organization has accomplished. Here's the metrics we could hit if we were funded. Is this something that speaks to you or not? The biggest thing, my biggest challenge, I need third parties who can serve as those connectors. I've kind of artificially, to go into a sports term, I've kind of artificially gone from worst to first. I didn't make it in business 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Now I have a cachet of people I could turn back to that also made it, asked to support the organization, as typically is the case. So if there are people of capacity that you're listening and you know of people, again, I just want people to connect me. You can reach me. There's a web form on our website, www.deskovic, DESKOVIC.org. I answer the emails. I'm on social media, Deskovic Foundation on Instagram, on Facebook as well, Jeffrey Deskovic. I have my personal page, which is public. The public figure page, I copy things over so people can keep up, and the organization is available also has its own Facebook page, so people can reach me there. Beyond this podcast episode, there is a documentary short called Conviction, which is available on Amazon Prime. It's about my life post exoneration and doing advocacy work. I do want to mention a good moment for me to mention my game. So I co-own a game. It's called Recharge Beyond the Bars Reentry Game. Co-own it with the game's creator, Leslie Robinson. And it facilitates formerly incarcerated people with reconnecting with friends and family and connecting with new friends through icebreaker type questions.
Fantastic. Boy, you just nailed all that. Just blah. I love it. So good. So here is our game.
It's now that time in the show to play the fast fastest growing game in the podcast world. We call it Heel Hustle. Today our guest will try to answer all 6 of these questions in 60 seconds or less to win an Amazon gift card. Amazon not responsible for this commercial spot, nor did they pay to let us use their name. Audience, feel free to play at home. Are you ready? Let's put 60 seconds on that clock. Ready, set, hustle!
The game begins in 3, 2, 1.
All right, Jeff, here you go. One person you would trade places with for a week would be who?
Dr. King.
Nice. Guilty pleasure.
I like watching SmackDown.
Nice. All right. Best compliment you ever received?
You're inspirational.
Wow. Worst piece of advice you ever received?
Don't go to law school. It's going to be 3 hard years. Just spend those 3 years doing advocacy work as a non-lawyer.
Nice. What's something you wish you were better at?
Basketball. I'm very good. I wish I could play at a professional level.
You kind of look like Mark Jackson, by the way. What never fails to make you smile?
Playing chess.
Nice.
Doing something new.
Awesome. Love that so much. Well, Jeff, that's our game. We call it Heel Hustle. As you can tell, we're still searching for a sponsor, so if you know anybody. I thought that was pretty fun. Yeah, there we are. All right. Well, Jeff, again, thank you so much for being here today, man. Really just appreciate who you are and what you're about. So thank you on behalf of our team here.
Thank you very much for having me on. This was a really fun interview, and I want to just share, we got my story out there. It was in a conversational manner, lots of human interest elements, and it did not at all feel like a deep dive into the case, yet all the essential elements were there. It didn't feel legalistic. Thank you.
It's always funny going from our Heel Hustle now to our soft close, peaceful music, by the way. We need to work on that. So I'm going to put the team on that. I love this little outro song. It's fun. Hey, so here's my question to you as we get out of here. First off, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kids of all ages, children of all ages. That's it. That's all. That's our show today. Have you ever thought about that for a second? Just let yourself go there in your imagination. Is there just lunacy there? A person being accused of something that they didn't do. So I'm wondering about this for you as we get out of here today. Is there something in your life, again, I come back to this moment, that you, for whatever reason, can't do? The human spirit is so impressive to me in this moment. So here's my question. A while back, we had a guy come on talking about 4 things that you need to get better at. I'm wondering for you today, is there a way you can get better to help somebody out today that maybe has felt imprisoned? Maybe in the literal sense or maybe in the figurative sense? Let me know. I'd love to know what your ideas are, because I have a few. I'd love to know yours. So tell me what those are. You can let us know at OPS Podcast Show on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also let us know on our website, opspodcast.com. A little different, but kind of the same. And remember this. Remember, before we let you go, remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. I want to thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned till next week when we walk in other people's shoes.